Hello patrons, and welcome to my second process video detailing the creation of my piece titled Still Rising. For this piece, I knew I wanted to use my wax-resist crayons with the water-soluble wax pastels to create strong borders of watercolor texture butting up against straight lines of white paper within the image. With that in mind, I came up with the concept for this piece when I saw some flowers growing on the chain link fence outside of my studio, and I thought that the contrast between the stiff geometric lines and the loose organic forms would be the perfect subject for my technique. The imagery of flowers growing through and around a chain link fence got me thinking about the symbology of nature growing past the confines imposed upon it. In the turbulent times we find ourselves in, for a multitude of reasons, the resilience of nature to grow in difficult and challenging circumstances can be a symbolic reminder that regardless of the hardships we face, our dedication to change, grow, adapt, and surpass our confines can allow us to thrive. I have always felt that sunflowers have a distinctly American aesthetic, and because our current system is in the process of repression and upheaval, sunflowers seemed like the perfect fit for this piece. I began by drawing in the composition lightly with pencil. Once I knew where the chain link fence would be, I drew it in with clear wax-resist crayon to keep those areas clear for the rest of the painting and drawing process. I began coloring in the image with the sky first, moving from the bottom up. I had an idea that I wanted to layer some of the visual elements, sky, leaves, flowers, using the watercolor effect, so I stopped coloring in between each visual element and activated the drawn-in pastel before moving on to the next section. Originally, I wanted to have the watercolor effect end about halfway up and transition into full soft pastel up top. So after I activated the half-drawn-in sky, I moved on to the leaves. As detailed in my previous video, I like to first draw in the value with gray, and then add on as many colors as needed on top of that foundation. Once the leaves were drawn in and activated with water, I decided that the background should have a consistent base, meaning that the blue watercolor effect had to be continued to the top of the piece. Once that was done, I moved on to coloring the flowers. Again, I first fleshed out each petal with the appropriate value using gray, and then filled in with colors. This produces a more muted palette than I usually work with. This is intentional, as I typically return to the watercolor piece with vibrant pastels that I don't want to combat with the underpainting. With the flowers drawn in, I went back and activated them with water, activating areas of similar color and value before moving on to adjacent areas that were darker or lighter to preserve some of the definition I had drawn in. I have been interested in the concept of quote-unquote unraveling for the past couple of years. The simultaneous anxiety and catharsis achieved by letting go and accepting the end. Both terrifying and relieving, it is throwing your hands up to the certainty of oblivion and saying, fuck it. While I don't stand by this philosophy in any way, or think that oblivion is necessarily certain, I do find it fascinating and incredibly relevant to the current mentality of many Americans and capitalists. I have approached the visual representation of this unraveling literally, breaking down representational imagery into basic visual elements, such as shapes and lines of color. In this piece, I intentionally bled the watercolor underpainting outside the bounds of its form, and later drew with pastel the same way, suggesting that even as we grow past the limitations of imposed confines, we are still susceptible to our destructive nature. Drawing with soft pastel on top of the fully activated wax pastel, I transitioned from more gestural, large marks up top to more refined, controlled marks at the bottom, mirroring the amount of quote-unquote unraveling distortion I painted in the watercolor layer. Due to the vibrancy of soft pastels, I focused on putting in highlights and areas with deep color that I was not able to achieve with the wax pastel layer. And that wraps up this process video with commentary. Thanks again for supporting the creation of my work. It is truly and sincerely appreciated. Till next time.